Arcadian Vanguard presents the Wrestling News in your daily wrestling newscast for Thursday, January 26, 2023. Good morning. I'm Mike Sempervive. We begin today with last night's live broadcast of AEW Dynamite on TBS from the Rupp Arena in Lexington, Kentucky. The main event saw Mark Briscoe make his AEW debut, defeating Jay Lethal in a match presented as a tribute to Mark's late brother Jay Briscoe. Mark won the match via pinfall using Jay's finisher, the Jay Driller.
If he hits this, it's over! Jay Driller! That's it, Riccoboni! I promise you that much! Cover! 2, 3!
Reach for the sky, boy! Who wins this match?
Mama and Papa Briscoe are holding down the fort in Sandy Fork right now with peace, love, and grace for everyone affected. For the fans around the world who love and care for Jay Briscoe and the families affected by this tragedy. But tonight there was a glimmer of hope.
Janet, keep your heads up. Love y'all. Jamin, boy, love you, baby. Love you, man.
Following the match, the AEW roster came out on the entrance ramp to memorialize Jay Briscoe. Earlier in the show, a video tribute to Jay Briscoe, real name Jamin Pugh, was played. Both Mark and Jay Briscoe had previously been banned from AEW television by Warner Bros. Discovery, but that ban was officially lifted earlier this week. In the opening match of the show, Chris Jericho teamed with Sammy Guevara to defeat Action Andretti and Ricky Starks when Guevara pinned Andretti. In his fourth successful defense of the TNT Championship, Darby Allin pinned Buddy Matthews. Following the match, former TNT champion Samoa Joe issued a challenge to Allin. Bryan Danielson, number one contender to MJF's AEW World title, beat Brian Cage. Both Cage and MJF attacked Danielson after the match, focusing on injuring his arm, until Konosuke Takeshita made the save. In a post-match backstage angle, Danielson defied ringside physician Doc Sampson, who tried to tell him that he might not be physically cleared to wrestle MJF in their scheduled Iron Man match at AEW Revolution on March 5th.
Dislocated. I wrestled 60 goddamn minutes with a separated shoulder. Ain't nobody stopping me from wrestling. Max, you think there's some monster behind the mask? Do you know what I think is behind the mask? Fear. Because you're afraid of getting hurt, you're afraid of being exposed, and you're afraid that I'm going to take the one thing that you value more than anything in this world, and that's that AEW Championship. But when I do, Max, I'm not just going to expose you. I'm going to show the whole world that what's behind that mask is a fraud. And the person who will be and should be the AEW World Champion is Bryan Danielson.
In other results, Ruby Soho stepped in for an injured Britt Baker, pinning Toni Storm thanks in part to a distraction from Baker, who emerged from the locker room during the match. Jungle Boy and Hook beat Matt Hardy and Ethan Page, and the acclaimed Billy Gunn and the Gun Boys took part in a pre-taped family therapy segment. Some news on the passing of Jamin Pugh, a.k.a. Jay Briscoe. A candlelight vigil for Pugh was held last night at Lee Worship Center in Laurel, Delaware. A funeral service was announced for next Sunday at the Laurel High School gym, with visitation from noon to 1 p.m. and the service at 1, followed by a private interment. Pugh, 38, died on January 17th in a head-on two-car collision on nearby Laurel Road in an accident, which also killed the driver of the other vehicle, 27-year-old Lillian Turnahan. Pugh's daughters, 12-year-old Gracie and 9-year-old Jaylee, are recovering from injuries sustained in the accident. In ratings news, Tuesday night's NXT broadcast experienced a slight increase in overall audience, but a decrease in viewership in the key 18 to 49-year-old demographic. Total viewership for the episode on USA Network was 607,000, up from the previous week's 600,000, according to Showbuzz Daily. The key demographic rating was 0.12, a slight decrease from the 0.14 rating of the week before, according to WrestleNomics. The 0.12 rating equates to about 162,000 viewers in the demographic. Now with some Impact Wrestling news, here's the Wrestling News' Lou Kipilman.
The company has announced the date and location of its biggest show of the year. The 19th annual edition of Bound for Glory, will take place Saturday, October 21st at Cicero Stadium in Cicero, Illinois, a suburb of Chicago. Bound for Glory is one of a series of Impact shows booked for Cicero Stadium in 2023, including the post-Bound for Glory TV tapings on October 22nd, Spring Slugfest the weekend of April 28th, and Chicago Heat the weekend of July 28th. Impact previously ran Cicero Stadium for the first time last August. Also run in recent years by MLW, Progress, and Evolve, the venue dates back to the 1930s and 40s, when it was run regularly by such promoters as Paul Bowser and Fred Kohler. The first wrestling card presented there took place in 1931, and was headlined by former world champion Ed Don George against future San Francisco promoter Joe Malkowitz. For the wrestling news, I'm Lou Kipilman.
In New Japan news, 2 additional matches have been added to the upcoming New Japan Pro Wrestling Battle in the Valley pay-per-view on February 18th. The Motor City Machine Guns team of Alex Shelley and Chris Sabin defend the Strong Openweight Tag Team Championship against the world-class Wrecking Crew, Royce Isaacs and Jarrell Nelson. Sabin and Shelley also hold the Impact World Tag Team titles. Also announced, Impact World Champion Josh Alexander will team with new NWA Historic Welterweight Champion Rocky Romero, Mascara Dorada, and Adrian Quest in order to face off against CMLL's Volador Jr., Kushida, the DKC, and Kevin Knight. Romero defeated Volador for the title last Friday night at Arena Mexico. Battle in the Valley's main event is scheduled to be an IWGP World Heavyweight title defense between 2 undetermined participants. IWGP champion Kazuchika Okada will first defend his title against Shingo Takagi on February 11th in Osaka, with the winner of that bout going on to face a still yet unnamed opponent in San Jose. Being held at the San Jose Civic, the New Japan show also serves as the North American debut of Mercedes Moné, the new persona of former WWE wrestler Sasha Banks, who will challenge Kairi for the IWGP World Women's title. Also previously announced for the card is AEW's Eddie Kingston against Jay White, a Filthy Rules match between Tom Lawler and Homicide, and 2 pre-show matches, Bobby Fish against David Finlay, and J.R. Kratos wrestles Alex Coughlin. With some unfortunate news, here's the Wrestling News' Lou Kipilman.
Eddie Cheslock, longtime Jim Crockett Promotions and WCW photographer, passed away earlier this week, as announced yesterday morning on social media by his longtime colleague Bill Apter. The native of Henrico, Virginia, was a Richmond area photographer who broke into the business in the Mid-Atlantic region in the early 1980s, when then Mid-Atlantic regular Greg Valentine first introduced him to Apter. He was known for his backstage photography, featuring a who's who of Mid-Atlantic and WCW stars of the 1980s and 90s. In recent years, Cheslock's photography was featured on the Mid-Atlantic Gateway website. He was 67 years of age. For the Wrestling News, I'm Lou Kipilman.
And before we leave you today, we'd like to remind you that however you consume your content, you can find the Wrestling News 24 hours a day and 7 days a week across social media. On Twitter, follow us at Wrestling News AV. Our Facebook page is also Wrestling News AV. The Wrestling News can also be found on the Arcadian Vanguard YouTube page. And for those who utilize Amazon Echo devices, just tell Alexa to play the Wrestling News podcast. And remember to make sure you add podcast at the end. Once again, for daily updates, breaking news, and more, follow the Wrestling News across social media. And that's the news for today. If anything happens, we will be here to tell you about it. No clickbait, no paywall, just the Wrestling News. The Wrestling News is a division of Arcadian Vanguard, and the Wrestling Newscast is a production of the Arcadian Vanguard Podcast Network.